All right, we're starting. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our special Titan Book Club event with the author of the Book of Dharma, Simon Haas. I would like just to take a moment to introduce him by showing a quick video, and then we will go from there. One second. I want to make sure I'm showing.
Simon Haas is an internationally renowned author and teacher of yoga philosophy. He specializes in applying yoga wisdom to everyday life, especially in the fields of leadership and decision-making. From the age of 13, Simon began studying the Upanishads and other sacred writings of India. He spent 10 years living in temple monasteries in India, immersing himself in the teachings of yoga. This is where Simon met his teacher, Sri Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami, an elderly master practitioner in the Bhakti tradition. Simon now focuses on making the wisdom of yoga accessible to contemporary readers and audiences. He is the author of the bestseller, The Book of Dharma, Making Enlightened Choices, published in 5 languages. His most recent book is Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul. All profits from Simon's work support registered non-profit causes, including Food for Life Vrindavan, which provides free education, healthcare and meals to over 1,500 children in need, especially girls, in rural Uttar Pradesh, India. Food for Life Vrindavan also focuses resources on tree planting and environmental cleaning. The Earth is a small, fragile planet. Its wildlife is dying, its forests are dwindling, its climate is changing. Never has there been a need as pressing as now, both locally and globally, for outstanding leadership to help resolve the world's most difficult challenges. The teachings of yoga provide a set of tools for empowered leadership and decision-making. They also call upon each of us, as practitioners, to live responsibly and to take action to help reverse the damage we have already caused. If the world's 300 million yoga practitioners were to unite in taking this global issue seriously, we might be able to say in the years to come, yoga led the way.
So that is a quick video to introduce Simon, and it is with great pleasure and a great honor to be able to welcome Simon to our book club today. Simon and I just met last fall, but it feels like we've known each other for many years. And I would consider him a mentor. I've learned so much from him. And as you can see, a lot of us are acquiring so much wisdom from his book, The Book of Dharma. So with that, we will go ahead and turn it over to him. I will just, before we get started, just give you a quick rundown of how the structure of today's event will work. Simon will start and he'll speak for some time. I'll be running the audio visual in the background for him. And then after that, we would like to switch it over to question and answers. For those that have been in the book club, you'll have a good sense of where we are. We're in chapter 4. And if you have questions and if you don't feel comfortable asking them, if you put it in the chat box, I can go ahead and ask them, but I'm happy for everyone to unmic and ask the questions themselves. So Simon, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rikin. Well, I want to start by saying that truly it's an honor for me to be here today and to have the chance to meet all of you. I don't consider myself, although despite Rikin's very kind words, I don't consider myself to be a mentor or a teacher in any way. In fact, I see all of you as my teachers. And the opportunity to share these teachings of Dharma from the ancient Indian tradition is just a real privilege for me, and it deepens my own practice. So I always take the opportunity to be able to share these teachings and also have the chance to meet incredible people like you. So I wanted to maybe begin with a small story, a short story. It is one of the first stories that I heard from it. Its origin is in the ancient texts of India. You may have heard of the Mahabharata.
Sorry, Simon, before you move on, do we want to just start off with just setting the intention?
I'll move. Okay, that's a great idea.
So remember, just for those of us that have been on the book club before, just our 3 principles of intention setting that we'd like to set for every session is that we're all here and that we're fully present. If your camera can be on, that would be ideal. And that we're bringing our full-hearted participation. The second principle is that everyone comes determined with that determination to learn. And the third is that we're respectful of each other and all our different backgrounds. So on that note, then, Simon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So we'll begin with a short Mangala Charanam. A Mangala Charanam is an invocation, a sacred invocation that opens a circle of wisdom. And traditionally, this is done with the help of mantras. You may have heard of what a mantra is, many of you. Man means mind, and tra means to release. So a mantra is that which releases the mind. So what is it that we're releasing the mind from? Fear, lamentation, and confusion, the 3 types of suffering relating to time. Fear is suffering associated with the future. Lamentation is suffering associated with the past, and confusion with the present. And it's said in the ancient texts that if we can create a space which is free from these 3 types of suffering, that's known as a sacred space. So sometimes we hear the term sacred space, and it sounds something quite esoteric, but actually it's very experiential. You know a sacred space when you enter one. It's when there's no fear, lamentation, or confusion. So with the help of some mantras, we'll set the intention for this session and create a sacred space. Om Ajnanatirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. He Shri Guru Jnana Dadina Bandho Swananda Datta Karunaika Sindho Brindavana Sina Hitavatara Prasidha Radha Pranaya Prachara Yuvatinang Yata Yuni Yunancha Yuvato Yata Mano Bhiramate Tadvan Mano Bhiramatang Tvai Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Thank you very much. These mantras have very deep meanings, and they come from the ancient texts of India. I want to explain just one of them very quickly so that you have a sense of what these are about. I know that Rikin has been explaining the Mangalacharanam verses that he has been using for each of the sessions. So one of these is Trinadapi Sunichena. It's an invocation to bring auspiciousness and wisdom into our circle, but through through the example of nature. So nature has so much to teach us, and we'll have a look at that in the book of Dharma, one of the last chapters. I think it's the penultimate chapter, which speaks about how we can learn from everything around us. So this particular mantra, it finds inspiration in grass and trees and all of nature around us. So the tree has such beautiful qualities. The tree gives everything it has, its roots, its fruit, its shade, without making any differentiation between, well, I'll give to that person, I'll withhold from that person, but rather gives everything without asking for anything in return. And even when someone may come back and with an axe, the same person actually who's taken from the tree may come back with an axe to cut that tree down. The tree never holds malice in its heart. So if we can develop the qualities, the best qualities that we find all around us, then we invoke wisdom within our heart. And so this particular prayer is a prayer for invoking knowledge or wisdom within from all of the teachers into our own circle as we begin.
Thank you.
So I remember when, as a young boy, I made my way to India, and living in the monastery in India at that time was a very different experience than going to India today. And I say that because now the world is so closely interconnected, and with smartphones you can stay in touch, and it's a much smaller place, you could say. At that time, and you'll all remember this, 30 years or in the 1980s and 1990s, for instance, earlier as well, if you traveled to somewhere like India, it'd be very difficult to keep in touch. So you'd have to send an aerogram to your family. It would take a month to arrive, and there was no certainty it would even reach. So India was quite a distant land. And I lived in the monastery, several temple monasteries in central India, not far actually from the Taj Mahal. Those of you who are familiar with India, there's a place called Mathura, and it's the birthplace of Krishna. And living in the monastery, we would rise very early, at about 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the morning. For me, it's 5 o'clock a.m. here today. I know you're all coming in, joining this session from different parts of the world. For some of you, it's late. For some of you, it's early. And we would sleep on the floor, on the stone floor, just with a thin straw mat, and shave our heads, and rise early and begin our meditation. And every year, around this time actually, a full moon that's coming up very soon, we would travel across the breadth of India and go to a place called Navadvip. And this was a very special occasion because monks and pilgrims from all over India would come to this particular location once a year and share the wisdom that they had learned and practiced over that previous year. So we traveled across India by train, and Navadvip used to be one of the leading centers of learning throughout all of India. People would come to study Vedanta, And it's a stunning place on the bank of the river Ganga, the Ganges. At that point, the Ganges and another river called the Jalangi, they come together and they merge into a single river. So you have a river you have the Ganges, which is a light color, and the Jalangi, because it has a muddy bottom, it's a dark color. And they come together and they don't mix for some reason, and they flow side by side for many, many miles downstream. And along the line where these two rivers meet, you have river dolphins that like to come and play. So we had all assembled under 2 banyan trees. And maybe there were 15,000 people, 10,000, 15,000 people, pilgrims from all over India. And one elderly monk, he stood up and he began to speak. And he told this story, which had such an impact on me that I like sometimes to share it with others. So he said one day there was a prince. And this prince, he went into the jungle hunting. So he was riding a horse and he went deep into the jungle, carrying a bow and an arrow. And the jungle in India is a dangerous place. There are many wild animals. So he saw in the distance what looked to him like a deer. He took an arrow from his quiver, set it onto his bow, and took aim. And just as he was taking aim, there was a loud roar, the roar of a tiger. And the horse on which he was sitting got frightened and jumped up on 2 legs like this. And because he was holding his bow, he fell off his horse and the horse bolted away. The prince picked himself up and looked around and he saw the tiger approaching. So I don't know if any of you have cats. Some people are cat people, some people prefer dogs and puppies. If you have a cat or you know anyone who does, you will have seen that sometimes a cat sets its focus on a particular bird or other animal, and it crouches down, and with its eyes fixated at its prey, it begins to move gradually towards it. So the tiger was doing that to the prince. The prince picked himself up and fled for his life, running through the jungle. In the jungle, there were many trees with sharp thorns like swords that slashed against the prince as he pushed his way through the undergrowth and the bushes and trees. In the distance, he saw what looked like a clearing, and he thought to himself, if I can get to that clearing, maybe there'll be a shelter, a house, or somewhere that I can go to and find some protection. As he ran into this clearing, he saw that it was empty. There was nothing there. And suddenly he found himself falling. What had happened is that in his fear, as he was rushing forward, he wasn't able to see that there was a disused well. So sometimes a community will set up like a home in a particular clearing. They'll create a clearing in the jungle, and they'll live there for a while. But if the well that they build, it becomes dry, then they'll have to move on and go to another place. So this particular well had become dry, and the community that had lived there had long left. And these wells can be really quite dangerous. If you ever travel to the Far East, there's grass that grows over them, and they become invisible, and it's easy to fall into them. So he fell into one of these wells, but he had the presence of mind to catch hold of 2 branches of a tree. and these branches of the tree broke his fall. So before long, he found himself suspended halfway down this well, holding on to these two branches. It took him a little bit of time for his eyesight to adjust to the darkness below. But as he looked down, he saw that at the bottom of the well, there was no water, simply poisonous serpents and scorpions. And he looked up, and around, circling the mouth of the well was the tiger waiting for him. Now the prince, he thought to himself, no problem. I'll simply hold on to these two branches. And after a while, the tiger will lose patience and will continue on in the jungle. I'll then be able to climb up these two branches, and I'll be able to return to my kingdom. What a story this will be to tell the princesses. And so he was waiting, and suddenly he heard a sound that at first he didn't recognize, like a kind of a scratching sound. I don't know if I can reproduce it. Let's see. No, that doesn't quite do justice to it. He heard a scratching sound, and he looked up. He saw there was a black rat eating away on one of the branches. And he saw on the other side, there was a white rat eating away on the other branch. He thought to himself, now I'm in trouble. And as he was considering what he might be able to do, suddenly there was something moist that dropped onto his face, onto his cheek, and flowed down his cheek and onto the side of his mouth. And it tasted sweet. And he recognized the taste, honey. Some drops of honey were falling from the tree above. He looked up and he saw that what had happened is that in shaking these two branches, as they broke his fall, he had disturbed a hive of bees, which had cracked open slightly. And a few drops of honey were flowing down in his direction. He saw another drop was falling, and he put out his tongue to catch it. And he was thinking, when will the next drop fall? Oh, yeah, I see it, it's coming. No. Yeah, now, yeah. And then he managed to catch it. And in his absorption to try and catch a few drops of honey, our prince completely forgot the perilous situation that he was in. Almost, you could say, almost in a state of madness. He forgot, he became oblivious to the dangerous situation with which he was faced in that moment. So having said that, the monk who had told this story sat back down. And I looked around me and I saw everyone was looking towards each other. What did this story mean? Who's the prince? What is this about? And I also didn't know. And I wondered, what does this story signify? But then I saw that there was one elderly monk who was smiling. And this elderly monk, he understood the meaning of the story. He now stood up and he began to speak. He said, the prince is you and I. It can be a prince or a princess. It doesn't matter. It's you and I. In this world, mostly life turns around the principle of exploitation. And that's why the prince is a hunter. So easily we are prepared for our own apparent interests. We're prepared to cause violence to others. Or if not, at least when violence is being, when there is violence to others, we're prepared to turn away and ignore that. So the prince enters the forest as a hunter. Interestingly, the hunter becomes the hunted, but the prince enters the forest as a hunter and falls off his horse and is chased by a tiger. That tiger represents death. Death is all around us, but generally we prefer not to look. So especially in our society, in contemporary society in the West, death is very much hidden from view. Illness is hidden from view. These are things we don't like to think about. We don't like to speak about. They make us uncomfortable. But every so often, death roars loudly in our life. So maybe a family member passes away. Maybe we very narrowly escape death. Maybe someone very dear to us almost, becomes ill. Most recently in my own life, my wife's research partner passed away because of COVID. Death roars every so often and brings fear and anxiety. So the prince runs into the jungle and sees a clearing and rushes into that direction, looking for shelter, and falls into this well, but manages to catch on to two branches of a tree. These two branches represent the helpful and unhelpful habits that suspend us, that support us and suspend us in our world. So the prince holds on to these two branches and then hears the sound of like scratching or gnawing on these two branches, which are the white and the black rat. What do the white and black rat represent? Does anyone want to take a guess? The black rat? Sorry?
Like good and evil?
It's a good guess. It's a good guess. Not in this case.
I would say yin and yang, the masculine and feminine energy.
That's pretty close too, actually. In this case, they represent day and night. The black rat represents night, and the white rat represents day. So, look, we don't know how much time we have left in this world. I cannot tell you, nor can you tell me or anyone else how much time we each have. But there are two things I can say for sure, and feel free to disagree if you wish. The first is that whatever amount of time we have, it's limited. It has a beginning and an end. And the second is that whatever limited time we have, it is being eroded by every single day and every single night that passes. So how important this human life, this life that we've been given, how valuable and how important it is for reaching our full potential. So the prince, he's then looking up for these few drops of honey that are falling from the broken hive. And that represents the small comforts that keep us where we are and that allow us to forget the purpose of our life, which is to reach our full potential. What allows us to forget and to remain where we are these few drops of honey and they'll be different for each of us. It's so in our daily life, there's so much potential for personal growth. There's everything around us be a teacher for us. But there are also certain habits, you could say, habits of comfort that give us the false illusion of safety, that allow us to stay where we are and not to take that journey that we're actually destined to embark upon. And those are those few drops of honey. So having explained this elderly monk sat back down, and then other teachers stood up and they began explaining the teachings of Dharma. These teachings are very powerful. They were originally intended for queens and kings to rule wisely. So a king or a queen, if they make a decision, it'll affect an entire kingdom, not just one or two people, but an entire kingdom. So the rishis or sages of India, they understood how the quality of decision-making of a queen or a king is paramount. So they presented the Dharma code. The Dharma code is a set of 4 principles, universal principles: truth, purity, non-violence, and discipline. And by living these principles in our life, we invoke something that is much larger than us. We invoke what is known as Dharma. Dharma comes from the Sanskrit dri, which means to uphold or to support. In other words, when our thoughts, words, and actions are of such quality, the universe itself supports us in our efforts. It requires, in a sense, you can say it requires no additional effort on our part. We're no longer living a lie. We're completely aligned with truth. Everything that we do comes from a place of affection and care for others and for ourselves. We're operating from a state of real clarity, which is known as shocha, or purity. And we have the power, the potency of discipline, like a flame, like a fire that's burning within in the depth of our heart, as we live a life aligned with truth, and we live a life aligned with truth and with our moving towards the fulfillment of our full potential. So the teachings of India explain that we're not all built in the same way, in the sense that we each have a set of unique gifts. We each have a personality and a nature that's different, that's unique, and we each have a unique contribution to make in this world. And to be able to align with that and awaken that is to awaken Dharma in our life. And it's when we live in alignment with the hidden laws of life. So you've all heard, I'm sure, of the Wright brothers who invented the first flying machine in 1903. So the Wright brothers, they developed many different, it took them a long time, really, to develop a machine that would actually fly. They tried many different wing designs, hundreds, until they finally came up with one particular wing design, which was just exactly the right shape of wing. And then something incredible happened. A contraption that's so heavy that several people can't lift it, with the right design of wing, it lifts into the air, carrying a passenger, or carrying today hundreds of passengers. So in the same way, with the right design principles, we experience lift in our life, where what we're doing is supported by the universe itself. And the rishis developed this system so that, in particular, those who have great influence in the world can make powerful decisions in their life, decisions that lead to the best possible outcomes for themselves and for all those around them. So I want to open it up just to a few questions before we continue, and we'll have a quick look at each of the 4 principles of Dharma with a few examples. If you don't have any questions or comments or thoughts that you might have, anything you want to share, that would be great. Yes, please.
I would like to ask the connection Dharma code with science. Because what the Wright brothers were doing was also opening the science, and nowadays we have the artificial intelligence. How do you see the connection in between? Thank you.
That's a great question. So yes, I'm using the Wright brothers, the analogy of the Wright brothers as a metaphor, but for certain, I don't know if the Dharma code has ever been studied by sociologists or scientists with the rigor of scientific discipline. I think that would be a very important and worthwhile direction to move into. What I can say is that this particular system has been tried and tested for several thousand years. And so in the experience of leaders, kings and queens and rishis over a very long period of time, it has been seen to be very successful. One other dimension of this is that you see these principles at play in all cultures. So, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because I wanted to emphasize this, that these are not four principles that, although I'm expressing them from the tradition of ancient India, they're found in all traditions. The principle of nonviolence is known as the golden rule, which you find in all religious traditions, civilizations, and wisdom traditions around the world. One way you can look at this, if you want to look at it in a way that is scientific, is to compare this with linguistics. So every single language expresses four domains necessarily: the domain of being, the domain of relating, the domain of doing, and the domain of differentiating. So in English, for instance, actually in most languages, you have 8 parts of speech: nouns, pronouns, verbs, adverbs, adjectives, and so on. And they fit very neatly into 2 for each of these. So, for example, the domain of being, which is everything around us, the things around us, that's expressed by nouns and pronouns. If you look at the domain of doing, that's expressed by verbs, and it's expressed by interjections. That's like an inner doing. If you look at differentiating, that's expressed by adjectives and adverbs. Adjectives differentiate between different types of things. And if you look at relating, that's expressed by conjunctions and by prepositions. So what's the relation between the pen and the notepad? The pen is on the notepad. That's the relation. So really, the 4 principles of Dharma are simply expressing excellence in each of the domains of life, the primary domains of life. What is the best way that you can relate? The best way that you can relate, at a minimum, is not to inflict violence on others or on oneself. If not further than that, to have deep care and affection for others, love and affection for others. What is the best way to be able to differentiate, which is to develop the clarity that comes from the principle of shocha, where we're not being moved by anger or boredom or fear, or we make our decisions from a place of real clarity. We're taking, we're cognizant and aware of what place we are in when we're making decisions. What's the best place? What is excellence within the domain of doing? Discipline, but a certain type of discipline, discipline that's aligned with truth, the fire of discipline that comes from a place of who we truly are as a person, and the focus of the mind and senses in order to reach our full potential. And what is the best place? What is excellence in the realm of being? Surely that's truth. To be able to be true to who we are, and to act from a place where we we'll look at this in briefly soon. Truth is a very important principle. Rather than resisting everything that is happening around us, to be able to first accept what is as it is, and then to act from that place. That is a very powerful place from which to make change in our own life or in the life of others. So really, these four principles of Dharma are universal in that sense. They are simply excellence in the four primary domains of life. But I would like to see, I'm sure that in time, someone who has the background in some field of science that's appropriate may want to look into this in a different way also. Thank you for that question. Very interesting. Thank you. One thing I love about the Dharma Code is that it's actually not something that is new or different. These are four principles. We've all been applying them in our life to one extent or other. Someone who has no ability in the field of nonviolence would not be able to operate in society. If someone doesn't have discipline in their life, they wouldn't be able to rise from bed. And in fact, sometimes we go through experiences where they're sometimes known as dark nights of the soul, where the ability even to have discipline can collapse for some time. So these are principles we apply in our life all the time, but we may not apply them consistently and consciously, and we may not apply all four at the same time. And that's very important. It's a little bit like, do any of you go camping? I don't know if people still go camping these days. So nowadays you have these tents where you just flick something and they kind of pop up and you don't need to do anything. But before, the tents, it took a while to build them. You had like your 4 posts and you needed to work on each of them. If you just try to push one post through, the tent won't rise. But if you do a little bit on this side, a little bit on that side, a little bit on the 3rd side and the 4th side, eventually the tent reaches its full capacity, its full potential. So also with truth, purity, non-violence, and discipline, if we simply focus on one of them, the tent will not reach its capacity. We won't reach our full potential. Usually what happens, in my personal experience, is that if we have a difficulty in our life, we reach for one of the principles, which is discipline. We try to put as much work into the problem as we can. But if the effort that we're making is not aligned with truth, if the effort that we're making is violent to ourselves and to others, if it comes from not from a pure place, we actually don't resolve the problem, we enlarge it. So it's the rishis explain it's very important to live all 4 principles together, and then that allows us to manifest dharma in our life. How do we know that dharma is alive and well within us or within any particular domain, kingdom in our life, so to speak? I'm going to refer to kingdoms because this system, you can apply it to anything. You can apply it to your business, you can apply it to your relationships, you can apply it to a specific project, you can apply it to the entirety of your life. And the results are directly perceptible. So how do we know when Dharma is flourishing? We feel great vitality in our life. No longer are we living from day to day feeling alienated and like a deadness within us, but we feel great strength and vitality in our life, very connected to something that is primal in the universe, within ourselves, something that is, we connecting to something that is primal. And as a result of that, I'm going to speak from my own personal example. Really incredible things begin to happen in life, unexpected things. And a little bit later, I'll try and share with you why that happens in the way that it does when we invoke Dharma within our life. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? We'll definitely be having more questions and sharing of thoughts and comments later. But if any of you have anything you wish to ask, please.
Delightus does.
Yeah, thank you, Rikin. Well, first of all, thank you, Simon, for sharing the metaphor and the story. Like you're a super great storyteller, so thank you for that. First of all, thank you for taking the time as well to be among us. And my question would be, and probably it's something you're going to cover later on, but what is one thing that you would recommend as a routine, like for us during our day to be with our Dharma? What is one thing you would recommend us to focus on?
One single thing. Okay.
If it's easier for 2 or 3, yes, I think we're good to go with 3. Yeah? Okay.
Let's, with your permission, let's do this. Let's very briefly cover the 4 principles, and then we will go, we'll move our discussion into application, and then I'll return. I promise I'll return to your question, which is a really good one.
Thank you, Simon. Well, I will see it on the replay because unfortunately I won't be able to say it until the end. However, thank you so much. I will definitely watch it.
Okay, we'll definitely cover it. I promise. Thank you. So, truth. These 4 principles, truth, purity, nonviolence, and discipline, are like sutras. So a sutra is the Sanskrit that means tip of a thread. So if you take a more contemporary analogy, if you've probably all had the experience of having Scotch tape, or what they call in England sellotape, where you can sometimes struggle to find the end of it, right? You run your finger along it, you put it to the light, looking for the end. If you can find the end though, you can open up the Scotch tape and use it for whatever it is you want to use it for. So in the ancient world, they didn't have Scotch tape, so they used the analogy of a spool of thread. If you can locate the tip of the thread, you can unravel that spool, and the thread you hold may extend for many hundreds of yards. So truth, purity, nonviolence, and discipline are simply the tip of a thread. And the rishis have given us some indication of what that tip is, just so that we can begin our journey. But then it's for each of us in our own life to unravel that spool and to see where it leads us. I found in my own experience that the more we think about, and more importantly, live these principles in our life, the deeper our understanding of them becomes. And the deeper our appreciation and understanding of them develops. So truth, or satya in Sanskrit, is just the tip of a thread, and the rishis have given us some indication of what that is. So I want to focus on one or two important aspects of truth, and then we'll quickly move on to the others. One of them is being true to who we are. And I find that so important because in our culture and society, there's a lot of pressure on us not to be true to who we are. There are ideas of what it means to be successful. And there are stigmas attached to certain things that are considered, in our society not to be successful. I don't know if you've heard of a nurse named Bronnie Ware. Bronnie Ware is a palliative nurse. So she looks after patients who are in the last days of their life. And she thought to herself, I won't simply look after these patients as best as I can. Maybe I can also learn from them. So she began asking them questions, because awareness of our mortality can give us a perspective that is often lost in the hectic flow of life. So she began asking them questions. What in your life went well? Is there anything you would do differently? Do you have any regrets? And there was one regret that kept coming up again and again and again. What was the number one regret of dying patients? I wish I'd had the courage to lead a life true to myself rather than the life others expected of me. That was the number one regret. I wish I'd had the courage to lead a life true to myself rather than the life others expected of me. This is the same teaching that Krishna gives to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, a classic yoga text. Krishna says it's better to follow your path, even if you make mistakes, than to follow someone else's path and do that perfectly. So in our life, we can follow the path of, so-called what others consider to be successful. And we could do that perfectly. We can look the part. We can have all the symbols of status. We can have the large income, whatever it is. And it can look right, but we will never feel fulfilled. There will always be an emptiness. And that's because we're not aligned with the principle of truth. So the thing about truth is that it's self-sustaining. You can kick truth around as much as you like, it retains its shape. But a falsehood is very difficult to maintain. And the biggest falsehoods are the ones we tell ourselves. In fact, if we're telling ourselves falsehoods, we'll be false with everyone around us. And to maintain a lie is an incredibly difficult thing. As soon as the cracks reveal themselves, you try and hide them in one place, they reveal themselves somewhere else. And it creates anxiety and fear. But if we lead a life based on truth, truth is self-sustaining. It requires no additional effort on our part. It's the strongest, the surest foundation we can have. So if we build our life on truth, the life we build is supported by the universe itself. It requires no additional effort on our part. Another aspect of truth is having alignment between our thoughts, our words, and our actions. So there's one text known as the Hitopadesh, which was a text that was written to train princes and princesses. And speaking about Dharma and other cultures, This particular text was considered so helpful that the Persians, it was translated into Persian and became, with a Persian name, it became extremely popular in the area of Iran and further afield. And it's a text that has actually traveled around the world in various forms. So in this particular text, it defines Mahatma. You may have heard of the word Mahatma as in Mahatma Gandhi. It means a great soul. So this text explains, one particular verse explains, the small-minded person is someone who thinks in one way, speaks in another, and acts differently. But the Mahatma, the great soul, is someone who says what they think and who does what they say. So one thing about truth is that by living a life of truth, we invoke great power, potency in our perceptual world. I think as children often, children sometimes can instill fear in adults. So especially in formal settings, because they speak through the various lies and facades and things that we create. So it can be, sometimes the child will say something that is just, how to put it? It's just so truthful. That
I can
put
it's revealing. It's revealing.
Revealing. I think though over time, we can lose our connection with truth. And sometimes we become so accustomed to building facades and creating impressions that we lose touch with who we are as a person, and we lose touch with the principle of truth itself. And it may be later in life when, maybe following a dark night of the soul or some difficulty in our life, that we can no longer sustain that. And we make a very big change in our life, perhaps. Even if it's an internal change, it may sometimes be reflected also in external circumstances, where we reassess and we try to come back to this principle, this foundational principle of truth. So let's move to nonviolence quickly. Nonviolence is considered to be the most important of the 4 principles of Dharma. So if ever there appears to be any conflict between the principles, I have found that there doesn't actually. But sometimes if we're thinking about it, especially on an intellectual level, we may sometimes see an apparent conflict between the principles. The rishis say always give first importance to the principle of nonviolence. So nonviolence actually is simply a gateway. It's a starting point. Really, this particular thread, when we unravel it, it leads us to love and affection for others, for everyone, and love and affection for ourselves also. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives the definition of a yogi. So those of you those of us who practice yoga in our life, this definition is very interesting. Atma paumyena sarvatra samam pashyati arjuna sukhang va yadi va dukhang sa yogi paramo mataha. What is a true yogi? True yogi is someone who sees the dukkha, the suffering or misfortune of others, as if it's their own, and who sees the flourishing or happiness, the sukha, of others as if it's their own. So usually in life, we can be the opposite of that, where if someone who we see as a competitor is not doing well, we're pleased. And if someone even someone who we may consider a friend, if they're doing better than us, we may feel some in our heart, we may feel some sadness. But inverting that, where we feel happiness, genuine happiness to see the flourishing of others, and we feel that the misfortune of others is as important as our own circumstance. That's the quality of a yoga of a yogi or a yogini. All the asanas that we do are ultimately to take us to that point. So that's the principle of ahimsa or non-violence, which is sometimes also expressed as daya or kindness, compassion. So these four principles of Dharma, they come from an ancient text called the Bhagavad Purana. I mentioned that just so whatever I'm sharing here is not anything that I've constructed. It's coming from an ancient tradition. And it's been tried and tested for generations. So Shocha, the principle of purity. Now, I sometimes find that we may struggle with the English words, or the words in other languages, if we translate it into Spanish or Polish and so on. So purity, all words have a set of connotations. So for some people in England, for instance, purity has certain connotations to some of Victorian morality. But Shocha is not about that, really. It's, if you say purity in other countries like Lithuania, they like it very much because it has a different set of connotations. But purity really is purity of food. Think about purity of food or water. We would want to drink water that is pure. We would want to eat foods ideally that are not poisoned by pesticides, that are maybe organic and nutritious. So in the same way, purity is about what we're consuming every day. Mostly we're quite attentive to what we consume in terms of physical food, but we're actually consuming with all of our senses. We're consuming with our eyes. Every time we log on to Instagram or Facebook or whatever, we're consuming. We're consuming through our ears, through every sense. Even with, importantly, the mind is known as the queen or the king of the senses because it governs the others. Whatever we continuously focus on with our mind, we're enlarging. We're consuming, we're drinking it. So the ability to recognize, to be attentive to what we're consuming, and and to understand what nurtures our world and what's toxic for our perceptual world is the principle of purity. And to make it, I might have to get a glass of water, apologies. To be able to differentiate between that and to make decisions from a powerful place of purity is what Shocha is about. And then finally, the fourth principle, and we're moving as quickly as we can here so that we can open this to discussion. The principle of discipline is known as tapas. Tapas means heat. So say, for instance, you're trying to cook something, or I'm trying to cook something. Even if it's something simple, say I'm making rice, probably one of the simplest things to make, or pasta. If I'm making rice, I can have all of my ingredients, water, rice grains, the best ones I can find, my utensils, my pot, everything, salt. I can have it all in place, but if there's the one thing that's missing, I won't be able to do anything. with the best ingredients that I have. And what is that missing thing? Heat. Without a flame, I can't even begin the process of cooking. So in the same way, we can spend all day talking about truth, purity, non-violence, but if we're not living it in our life, it really simply remains on the level of good ideas. So this is why discipline is so important. Discipline is the focus of the mind and senses in one direction to achieve our full potential. It's the living, actually the living, the bringing into action in our daily life of these principles of Dharma. To use a different analogy, imagine you're on a bicycle. The act of steering on a bike, it has no meaning or purpose unless you're actually moving forward. So discipline or tapas is what brings, it's what brings life to the four principles of Dharma. But importantly, discipline needs to be in alignment with truth, purity, and non-violence. If we're invoking discipline, if we're practicing discipline in our life, and it's in alignment with truth, we feel great vitality. It's not something that feels like it's being forced upon us. So it's not like discipline in the sense of, you see, it depends on the background we've had in our life. If we've had anyone who's been quite authoritarian in our life, as a youngster in particular, and we've been forced to do things that we never really wanted to do and that have been not aligned with who we are as a person, then discipline may not have the English word discipline may have the wrong connotations. In that case, maybe better to think of it as loving engagement rather than discipline, or think of the Sanskrit word tapas, which means heat. When discipline is in alignment with truth, it creates great vitality in our life. We feel so alive. We don't feel like we're being forced to do something against our will. It leads to what you can call effortless effort. And we've all experienced it, I think. We've all experienced that when we're so immersed in something that is, we love doing something so much, we may even forget to eat. We may forget to sleep. And we feel we may feel physically tired at the end of the day, but we feel even more alive. And that's because we're aligned with the principles of Dharma, we're aligned with truth, and we're aligned with tapas or discipline. Tapas converts into tejas. Tejas means potency or power. So before beginning any very difficult task, the kings and queens of India would enter into like a period of tapas, a period of internal reflection and developing that fire of tapas within them before emerging into the world and accomplishing that difficult task. Interestingly, I've seen that also in other cultures, where a warrior, before doing something difficult, will spend some time developing that. And we see it also in our society. Take, for example, people in sport. They'll go through a period of rigorous training. When they come out of that rigorous training, there's like an effulgence. There's great potency in them. You can see it just even in the way that they move, because they've practiced for a long period of time. They've practiced tapas. So let's open it to let's open it to discussion. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions, or you would like me to share more on particular aspects, I very much want to move into the area of application, how we can apply this easily in our life, and the question we had earlier, to look at that carefully, ways in which 1 or 2 or 3 ways in which we can put this into practice very easily in our own life.
Thank you, Simon. I'll just be moderating the questions because a few people sent questions beforehand. So I just asked Stacy if she wanted to unmic and maybe share one of the questions that she had. Stacy?
Hello. Thank you so much, Simon, for speaking with us today. And I was really interested, wow, just such powerful words that you use. I was really so interested, and you kind of touched on it with the video that you shared earlier, but you know, how we can proliferate these ideas, these actions, right? This alignment, because there's so much disconnection. I see so many opposing forces in the world, right? At the same time, it gives me hope that you have so many people coming together in yoga. So I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit, about your mission.
That's a great question. Thank you. I think now more than ever, these teachings are needed, and maybe the best way that we can, as you put it, proliferate these teachings is by living them ourselves. And I say that because it's really by the example of these teachings in practice that they will have power in the lives of others and our own life. We've been through a stage of several centuries, maybe, where we've been very focused on ideas. Ideas are important. Ideas are powerful ideas can make real difference. But we have tended to focus on ideas to such an extent that there hasn't, unfortunately, been powerful follow-through in our own life and in the broader world that we live. To an extent that we've reached a stage now, as you all know, of course, where it's a critical point. If we don't start living the best ideas that we have, we'll reach a position that's irreversible in terms of our broader global society and the environment and so on. So I personally see 2 ways in which we can really make a difference. The first begins with living these principles of Dharma in our own life. And the second is reaching out to leaders. So these teachings were designed for queens and kings exactly for that reason. But by leaders, I don't simply mean political leadership. I think that I see all of you as leaders, experts in your fields, the area of influence of individuals, professionals, and those of us who are heading companies and have important projects and so on. We each have an area of influence that's perhaps much larger. There are more people who have larger areas of influence than ever before. Certainly in in our world today and in our economic bracket. And so with that comes, I think, a certain responsibility and also an opportunity. And so sharing these teachings with leaders, I think, can make a huge difference. I see these two as important ways of sharing these teachings and really making a difference. I know you all may have various ideas also. These are simply two that come to mind.
Simon, I just wanted to move to Ami. Ami, if you wanted to share one of the questions that you had.
Sorry, Rikin, I don't have my questions handy. Can you just go for it?
Sure. You want me to
I don't have my phone with me, sorry.
No problem. We'll just bring it up. So the first question was, from the outline you had first defined for this book to the final product, how much did the book deviate and what did you further learn from it?
Oh, great question. Writing this particular book was really a very important part of my own practice and my own journey. And immersing myself in these principles really helped me deepen my own understanding of them. But I speak about this a little bit in Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul, that in the case of the book of Dharma, I actually wrote the book over what took a long time, and then read the manuscript and showed it to friends and realized that it just was not right. And that then led me to consider very carefully the project that I was doing through the 4 principles of Dharma. Was I aligned with truth fully? Was I aligned with the principle of shaucha, purity, and non-violence in its various dimensions? And I put away that manuscript completely, and I started from scratch. And well, let me backtrack a little bit. The reason why is that in the book I shared quite a few personal details that I had not really shared with others before, and so I was nervous about that, and I was worried whether the book would be well received or not. I had some financial concerns around it because I spent quite a bit of time on it. So these various influences were, they're often unseen. These kinds of, that's why the 4 principles of Dharma are very important, because they help us see what's easily unseen at a deeper level within us. So I put away the manuscript and started from completely again. And I made a decision that any funds that come from this project would go towards good causes. And I then started this project again, the writing project, from a different place. And externally, no one would have seen the difference. But for me, as a person working on this project, it was the difference between night and day. And the writing then after that, just what would have taken a long time of arduous work, the rewriting from a different place was like effortless effort. Within 6 months, the whole thing was completed. And yeah, the final result in terms of the manuscript, sharing it with friends and people I know, the reaction to it was also completely different. So in a way, writing the book was really very much a personal practice for me in the application of these principles of Dharma.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, Simon. Thank you.
We'll move on to Avni. Avni had a question.
Oh, hi, Simon. Thank you so much. You did mention, I've got a comment before I ask a question. You did mention that these principles are from thousands of years old, and that you didn't write them. But what I love about you and the whole book and having you here is that you're able to translate, you're able to communicate them in such a beautiful, simple way for us to understand. So I'm loving it. Thank you so much for being here. So my question is, and I've sort of answered it myself, which I always do before I ask the question, is that how do we know our truth? And I sort of added the fact that when we feel vitality, and I come from also the background of how do we help others, especially children or young adults, find their truth? Yeah, that's the first question.
I love the question, Avni. Thank you. There is this idea in our culture and society that, and you see that reflected in graduation speeches, where they say, find out who you are, and then discover your purpose and go out in the world and make a difference. But it doesn't work that way. Basically, these graduation speeches are asking people to do something that's nearly impossible. Hardly anyone can enter into a Buddha-like meditation state, discover exactly who they are as a person, and emerge from their cave-like meditation and go and make a difference in the world. It's really, it's through the attempt to make a difference that we discover who we are. It's through active engagement with the world that we discover our purpose. So, but it needs to be the right type of engagement. Engagement that with the world that expresses the very best we're capable of. And so I meet a lot of people who are really quite, so in traveling around the world and holding workshops in yoga studios and other places, many of us are concerned about finding our purpose. And it's almost like a holy grail for some, where we're searching for our purpose and we can become really quite unhappy as we're searching for it. And we think, maybe we haven't found it, and what is that thing that is going to make the big difference in our life? But really, we can find our purpose in just a moment. And what I mean by that is, by finding our purpose, it's living our life the best way that we can. And that is by making that decision to apply these principles of Dharma in our life. That's something that we can do immediately. And then how that manifests in a particular way, how that becomes a certain contribution will fall into place naturally as a result of acting in a way that is aligned with Dharma. So in relation to children, naturally, as parents, we have concerns about their financial future. There are certain steps that have to be taken if possible. Certain levels of education that at a minimum. So those are natural concerns. But beyond that, if we can allow youngsters to express themselves as freely as possible and to experiment and not lock them into a particular field, which might be the field that we're in ourselves, and not to live our own dreams, not to live our own unfulfilled dreams through our children, with all of the expectations that and burden that fall upon youngsters as a result of that. So maybe one way that we can help children and youngsters is developing that kind of self-awareness ourselves. And these 4 principles of Dharma are being taught in schools across the UK now. And you may have heard of Charlotta Martinus. She's doing incredible work in the UK with a project known as Teen Yoga, where these 4 principles are being taught in schools to teenagers.
Thank you, Simon. We'll move on to Gerald. Gerald had a question in the box, but I'll just have him speak his question.
Hi, Simon.
Hi, Gerald. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for the nice presentation. Because for me, it meets where I am at the moment. So mine is more or less about application. How are the 4 principles relate to the 3 things you said at the beginning, which was fear, lamentation, and confusion. So I wanted to see what connection can I make, and how maybe the 4 principles can help me to resolve those fear, lamentation, and the confusion.
Great. So fear, lamentation, and confusion are 3 types of misery or 3 types of suffering that affect all of us in various ways. And they especially, there are certain periods in our life, like a dark night of the soul, where these 4 become so intense that they even become seemingly unbearable. And we will each experience a dark night of the soul at least once in our life, if not more than once. But there's little or no training that we receive as we grow up, or in our educational system, to help us navigate these kinds of challenges. But even outside of a dark night of the soul, we'll experience fear, lamentation, and confusion to different extents. A focus especially on satya, or the principle of truth, in our life helps us dissolve that. What I mean by that is, one aspect of truth is that we all live a story. Each of us, we're a storyteller. So someone mentioned very kindly that they thought that I was a good storyteller. Thank you. That's very kind of you. We're actually all storytellers. And we're all really good storytellers. We're such good storytellers that we believe the stories unconditionally, unquestionably, the stories that we create. In our story, we're the lead character. And we think this is who we are. I think I'm Simon, I'm like this. I have this quality and that quality. I'm not that. This person is my friend, that person I'm not so sure about, like that. We create the story. And we take that story so seriously that we're even willing to lose friends over it. Anyone who supports our story, we think they're my friend. Anyone who kind of challenges or undermines our story, we think that person is not my friend, they're my enemy, or however you want to call it. But we rarely stop to think, how much of this story is even true? That we live a story is natural. It's how we create meaning in the world around us. But when we realize that this is just a story, it's a figment of our imagination. So much of the story that we carry, we haven't even authored it. Much of it is inherited. We inherit so many ideas from our family, from our friends, from society, and we carry that story with us wherever we go. And it's really quite a burden living our life within the limits, within the constraints of that story. All the decisions we make are from that narrative. So the ability, which is an ability related to truth, and this, I'm discussing this also in response to the question by, I forgot her name now. She asked a question, but she wasn't able to stay. It's related to this. If there was one thing that can help us invoke Dharma in our life and truth in our life, it's to remember not to take the story of our life so seriously. As soon as someone, if we can know whether we're taking our story too seriously, because it creates a lot of drama in our life. And as soon as we don't take our story so seriously, that drama disappears. Fear, lamentation, and confusion begin to, they become much less, and they begin to disappear from our everyday life. So that's definitely one way in which the practice of truth is related to fear, lamentation, and confusion. Thank you, Gerald. It's a great question. I want to just add something else about the practice of Dharma, which is also related to the earlier question. How do we apply this? So there are two main ways to apply the Dharma code. One of the ways is to look at this in terms of decision-making. So if you have a difficult decision, if I have a difficult decision, we can look at it through the lens of purity, discipline, truth, and nonviolence. And it can be very helpful, and it can shed some insight. But it's difficult to, the idea is not to look at everything that you're doing and constantly be thinking, is this related to truth? How does it relate to truth? How does it relate to purity? It's not intended to be a continuous intellectual exercise. The better and easier way of applying the Dharma code is to develop each of these four principles in our life like a muscle. So they're like a muscle. We can develop the muscle of truth. So we can take a look at our life. What are the ways and obvious ways in which we're acting against ourselves? We're not honoring truth in our life. And then we can take some steps related to truth. And just the practice of applying truth in our life develops a strength in truth. We can look at the ways that we're violent. So one way that we can be violent is in our self-talk, the things that we say to ourselves. We may look at that and see, wow, the things that I say to myself are really quite aggressive and violent. They're not very compassionate or caring. And we can make an effort to adjust just one small thing in relation to non-violence. That small adjustment can have a huge change in our life. I don't know if you know how you may have seen these huge supertankers. They're enormous ships. They're larger than several buildings put together. In fact, they're so big that when they turn, the arc of the turn that they make is so huge, it's extremely difficult to navigate a supertanker. So they have these enormous rudders. These rudders are like the size of a large multi-story building. But the rudder itself is so heavy that you cannot move it in the water. So what they do is they put a tiny little rudder on the rudder. It's called a trim tab. And this small rudder, they can move it one way or the other. And if they move the trim tab in one direction, the force of the water shifts the rudder in the other direction. And then the ship begins to move and turn. So there are little trim tab changes we can make in our life. We just need to identify them. Little small changes of truth, purity, non-violence, and discipline. If we make those changes, truth begins to grow strong. Non-violence begins to grow strong in our life. So I met one person in Lithuania, and he explained to me that he has so many good ideas. He was a young business person, young man going into, he wanted to be an entrepreneur. He was an entrepreneur, is an entrepreneur, and wanted to begin starting a business. And he had many good ideas, really interesting ideas and concepts. But he said that he struggled with discipline. And I asked him to tell me more about that. And I asked him many different questions about his life. And then I suggested a small change. Wake up early. So instead of rolling out of bed at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and for some people that might work really well. Some of us work in the nighttime, and we'll be working using a different schedule. As they say, they're early morning persons and late night people. So we all operate in a different way. But in his case, I suggested that he wake up early, like at 5. And that small change begins to stir the principle of discipline in his life. Because it takes a certain amount of discipline to rise early and to begin the day from that, begin the day in that way. And that little change was a trim tab change for him. Right from the beginning of the day, the first moment of the day, he was applying the principle of discipline. And that principle then carried through his day, and he found other ways to be more disciplined. And that led to really very good changes in his own professional life and personal life. So if we can identify trim tab changes and make those, small things can make a big difference in our application of Dharma.
Thank you, Simon. And we'll take one more question from Avantika.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Simon. I don't think it's more of a Q&A. It's just a great mutual discovery and exploration. Thank you so much for the book. Loved it, loved everything that I've heard so far. My question is, first I'm going to give you the question, and I'm going to give you like 2 pieces of why I'm asking this question. The question really is that what is the applicability of the Dharma code in the context of disruption, paradox, and evolution? I'm just going to give two little bit of context to that, because if you think of from the same thing, if you think of the Bhagavad Gita, there is this point where, Arjun is faced in the spiritual warfare with his entire guru's family, everyone that and his dharma at that point is to be the warrior and go into battle with them. The second context that I have is from, there are 2 goddesses in Indian mythology. One of them, Kali, who's a very raging goddess, who's very indiscriminate in her anger, and she'll just go for anything and everything. She's just angry. And then there's Durga, and her creation has been primarily because there were these demons who had become so powerful that they could not have been slayed by anything that was masculine in nature. And it took the creation of a very powerful warrior goddess with her balance and her equanimity to be able to conquer that thing. Now, I am doing work at generational level with the XYZ generations. And one of the things that I have discovered is that the universe is also going on a journey, right? So we have this concept of yogas and everything. And we're at this point going from a place of darkness back a little bit into more light, collectively. It's my belief, and I know that the work you do with the dark night of the soul, we're seeing a lot more instances of this happening, with more and more people awakening to the light and to awareness. And one of the necessary things that they have to do is not Dharma code in business as usual, where it's just about personal peace, but it's also about disrupting, facing these paradoxes where you're a yogini, you're into all of this bliss and equanimity, but then you have to go out there and fight established orders and break things down so that something new can rise. So my question really is applicability in this new world for a really, really disrupted and disrupting generation.
I love it. Thank you, Avantika. Beautiful. Yes, the Dharma code is not simply about creation, and it has very strong applicability in personal as well as communal disruption. And on a personal level, if there's not some form of disruption, then it's very difficult to build anything. And so you touched on one particular point that I think is really really important as well, which is a false notion in yoga, in the yoga community in the West, that yoga teachings are all about harmony and peace and fulfillment and happiness, to the extent that there's no space for the yoga teachings for times of upheaval and difficulty and crisis and disruption. But these teachings were actually designed for the field of experience being chaotic, frenetic, and disruptive, which is the very reason that the Bhagavad Gita, a classic on yoga, happens in the most unexpected setting. So normally you think of most of the yoga texts, the setting is in the forest by a beautiful river or in the mountains. But the Bhagavad Gita is a yoga text that happens in the middle of a battlefield. So the long line of teachers going back hundreds of years have explained the inner meaning of the Bhagavad Gita. And this long commentarial tradition explains that the Bhagavad Gita also has important symbolic significance. The battlefield is known as Kurukshetra. And Kshetra means field, and Kuru comes from Kri, which means action. So it's the field of action. We are all, each one of us, on the field of action. And that field of action can be very much like a battlefield. It can be disruptive, uncomfortable, chaotic, frenetic, unexpected changes in fortunes. So how do we operate in the best way in a field that is highly disruptive? And the Bhagavad Gita presents 18 systems of yoga from different perspectives, in order to be able to navigate a very disruptive field. The principle of truth is very much about recognizing disruption. So if we feel disruptive emotions like anger, frustration, we're sometimes trained to pretend they're not there. So we have pop psychology and spirituality that has these slogans like, choose happiness, step into peace, and so on. And so we have, I think, it would not be unfair to say that in the West, we've developed a culture of ignoring what is disruptive in certain fields and in certain communities, including the yoga, particularly the yoga community. But a principle of truth is being able to recognize and see and be with every part of us, including the parts of us that are really quite disruptive and uncomfortable, and not to pretend that they're not there. At the same time, the application of discipline means that we don't necessarily make decisions or act from that place. If I'm angry, I don't act and speak from that place, but I also honor and look at. I'm prepared to look at and see the anger that is within me, that may be within me, or that any other emotions that are uncomfortable, that put us in a place that we might not even want to acknowledge them. An aspect of truth is to acknowledge them and to see them exactly as they are. So I love what you're saying, and I think very much the yoga teachings are about difficulty and disruption. Thank you, Avantika.
Thank you, Simon. I'm recognizing that we are over time. So if Simon, are you still able to be here, or do you have something else that you need to get to?
I'm very happy to stay a little bit longer, certainly.
Okay. So then on that note, I know others may have to leave, and I just invite everyone to, if you have to go, not a problem at all. If those that want to stay and ask a couple more questions, we'll leave it open then.
For any of you that need to leave, I just would like to say that it has been such a privilege to meet you. I hope our paths will cross again. And thank you.
On that note, does anyone else want to ask a question? If they do, I know both Ami and Stacy have other questions, but please feel free if someone else wants to ask a question.
Can I just add, Ricken? Again, Simon, thank you very much. And Ricken, for the opportunity to bring Simon to the Titans and extended friends. As you can see, we have people from all over the world come along. So friends, Titans, I know some of you are more on the quieter side. So, like I'll call out to Maurice and a few other people. I know that you have burning questions in your mind. So really, this is an opportunity. Please take it. I don't know when we're going to get Simon back again, but I'm sure Ricken will work on it. So please ask the questions. We're going to stay on a little bit longer.
If any of you wish, if you have a question and you feel more comfortable to just type it into the chat, that would be completely fine as well. And also not just questions, if you have observations, challenges, personal thoughts, anything that you feel you'd like to share.
Okay, Simon, I have a burning question. So you went to India and you had this amazing personal inner journey and experience. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. The question is, when you came back into the Western world, how has it been for you to live, practice, and be with the four principles? Because it's one thing to live in an ashram, and I've had the experience where I leave Australia, go to the ashram, and it's blissful. Come back, and it's, whoa, it's the world. It's the world of children and partners and work and all of that. So in your own experience and journey, what has that been like for you? And what was it particularly like when you first came back? I believe after being away for 10 years, was it?
5 years. Every 5 years, I needed to go back to renew my visa.
So what was that like?
And then I would return.
And how do you manage? How do you manage to live life daily, practicing and honoring the four principles?
I love the question because it follows on very nicely with what Avantika was explaining, which is that in a temple, monastery, and an ashram, it's a less disruptive environment. So it's a more, how to put it, what's the word? It's a more, it's an environment that's more closed. So going into, moving out of that and returning to England initially, you're suddenly cast into a much more disruptive environment in a way. And so it's actually, it's certainly more challenging. It's a lot easier to, how to put this? It's easy to be a yogi or a yogini or a yoga practitioner when everything is peaceful around you. One's ability or one's the extent to which one has developed these principles and teachings and made them part of one's own being is really tested and challenged and deepened in a disruptive environment. And so I've actually found that I have learned as much and maybe more in the disruptive environment of everyday life than in the quiet solitude and peace of a monastery. One thing, coming back from India after a long period of time, there's one little anecdote that I'd love to share with you, because it does also emphasize the cultural and like the sharp difference between the two environments. So as a monk, there are no mirrors in the monastery, except for very small ones that are used sometimes for applying ritual clay markings on the forehead as a monk. But generally monks don't look at themselves in the mirror. So I'd been in India for 5 years and there had not been any mirrors anywhere. And I then came back to London and I needed to renew my visa, and I stayed with a friend, and I stepped into the bathroom and he had one of these mirrors that, you know, are practically the whole wall. And then so for the first time in 5 years, I was actually looking at my physical body. And it was just such a strange experience. And like, you know, you touch your face and you realize this is not actually who I am. It's like a mask of flesh that is like a vehicle that the body is a vehicle that we inhabit. A very important vehicle, because it's the vehicle by which we express our potential in this world, but it's also not who we are as a person. And being able to, that experience was as simple as it was, left quite an impression on me, I think, because everything around us, or a lot around us in terms of advertising, TV and so on, is so very much based on the physical body. How we look physically, you know, what size we are, what color we are, what background we have. And from that, a whole series of false designations are created in our life, where we identify with things that are really not who we are. That persona in our story, in ancient India, they have a word for it, to differentiate it from who we actually are. So they call that ahankara. Ahankara means the I maker. It's the main character in our story that we believe is who we are. And the rishis recognized that this character that we create, this lead person who, you know, might be a hero, might be a victim. You know, we may create that lead character as a victim. Whatever attributes we give that character, knowingly or unknowingly, generally it's unknowingly, it's a figment of the mind. And becoming aware of that is really very liberating. And it's the first step in bringing truth into our perceptual world. It also allows us then the creativity to move the narrative of our life in any direction we would like to. We're no longer as confined by the limitations of the story that we've inherited. We can create it afresh, consciously, following what is really a disruption. So becoming aware of that is a disruption. It's a little bit like if you're in a movie theater and you're watching an action movie or whatever movie. It can be a horror movie, it can be an adventure movie. You're watching that and you're fully invested in it. The lead character does well and you're elated. The lead character is in danger and you're fearful. But you can, of course, just very easily withdraw your attention from that. And suddenly you look around you and you realize, I'm in a movie theater. And this story that I was fully invested in is a story, nothing more. So the ability to withdraw from the story of our life is a practice known as meditation. And it brings clarity and truth into our perceptual world. Sometimes we think of meditation as being something quite exotic, where you have to sit on a mat and use mantras and so on. And there are very powerful techniques like that. But meditation is something we can do in a moment in our everyday life. So going back to that previous question about what is the one thing that we can do very easily in order to bring Dharma and truth into our life, it's meditation. And at any point, if we can withdraw from the story of our life and take it less seriously, we're practicing a form of meditation in our life. And we're inviting truth into our life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I wanted to just share one last question from Ami, which I thought was relevant to everyone in the group. It's the question is, during your study of Dharma, what comparative studies did you conduct to further reinforce that Dharma is impartial?
That's an interesting question. So when I read about the principles of Dharma, it is in the context of ancient texts and kings and queens who apply the principles of Dharma in large settings. My first experience with the Dharma code was in my own personal small attempts to apply it. So I come from a very difficult family background. And I thought if I could apply these principles in my life and see what they can do, then I'll know that they apply not just to people of great influence, kings or queens in that sense, but they'll also apply they'll apply equally to any of us. So I was raised in a family that had very few financial means. And before going to India, I was in a town called Leicester in England. And if there's any place in Leicester you don't want to live in, it's probably one of two areas, either Highfields or Beaumont Leys. So as a teenager, young teenager, I grew up in Beaumont Leys, and that area was run by gangs. And in fact, going back more recently, I went back to Leicester and drove through that area just to take a look out of curiosity. They've erected these huge towers, 20-foot towers with video surveillance equipment protected by barbed wire in various locations in that neighborhood. So the locals, what they would like to do is, if you didn't join one of their gangs, they would catch you and they would, torture you in different ways. So they would lock you to a lamppost with a D-lock, a bicycle D-lock, and leave you there for hours or half the day. until someone came to rescue you, usually the fire service or the police. So there was a lot of pressure when I grew up to lead a life to go into a direction that I recognized was not aligned with who I am as a person. So by that stage, I had already developed an interest in the texts of India, and I began reading about truth. I began reading about ahimsa, non-violence. And I decided at that young age that I was going to try and apply these principles. Looking back, my understanding of them was really quite simplistic and naive, but nonetheless, even the small attempt to apply them had enormous effect in the trajectory of my own life. So I understood that one of the best ways to develop shaucha, or purity, is to choose the people that one surrounds oneself with. If we spend time with people who inspire us and bring the best out of us, that's a very powerful way to develop shaucha or purity in our life. So I would go to the other side of Leicester and spend time with people that I admired and try to learn from them. And I decided to develop discipline by focusing my attention in putting a lot of attention to my education in school. And I invested my energies in that direction. So by applying these 4 principles, it made an enormous difference in my life. I come from a family where no one had gone to university. So I didn't have within my immediate family or friends, I didn't have anyone who, to look up to in that way. And by following the principles of Dharma, went on to continue my education, and incredible things happened, that just opportunities opened that wouldn't have opened previously, all from small attempts to make trim tab changes following the principles of Dharma. So I knew from a young age, seeing the natural results of the choices I was making, that this works. And it doesn't just work for queens and kings, it works for all of us. In a sense, you can say we're all queens and kings. We all have, we're all rulers of a particular field, which is our kingdom, which is the kingdom of our life. Our life will never be any better than the design principles we use to create it. And then whilst studying and doing some research for the Book of Dharma, I also noticed how these teachings were taken to Persia, because they were seen as very powerful and an ancient system for making wise choices. From studying the context of Persia, I also looked at ancient Egypt, and they also had a concept of dharma, which they applied. They use a different name for it. I can't recall just now, but it also begins with D, and it's completely akin to dharma. But so in ancient Egypt, they were utilizing the same or a similar system. And then looking more broadly, I was able to see that these 4 principles are found in all cultures and traditions. And I've always had quite an interest in archaeology and looking at ancient texts. And so I began looking at some of the oldest texts of Egypt, which are extremely old, and how they describe the qualities of truth, purity, non-violence, and discipline in different ways. And that gave me a lot of confidence that this is a system that is universally applicable. And I think probably the best way to test this is simply to try and live it and see what results happen in one's own life. in sharing this system over the years, that has been very much reinforced. So the Dharma code is being shared by people in prisons in the United States, and it's had a huge effect. It's being shared with teenagers in the UK, and it's having a huge effect. So it's clear that this is a system that doesn't just work for one small subset of people, but that can be used by anyone.
Thank you so much, Simon. I just wanted to recognize and let you know, because you probably can't tell, but on this call today, we had individuals from Kenya, Stuttgart in Germany, Curacao in the Caribbean, Portugal, Romania, Melbourne, London, different parts of India, Toronto, Ottawa, New Brunswick, Montreal in Canada, and Turkey. So I hope I captured every country, and if I didn't, please let us know. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and inspiring, all of us through this book. We've been meeting every week for the last, at least we started 5 weeks ago. And thank you for just coming in to help kind of take us further and continue us to inspire us on this journey. So on that note, we will wrap up. And for those of you that aren't in the book club and would like to join, please just direct message either Ida or myself. And we're still continuing to meet every week. And we will continue on next week, same time at 6 a.m. Eastern time on Wednesdays.
And chapter 5 next week, is that correct, Jürgen?
Yeah, we'll probably just overview chapter 4 and then move into chapter 5.
Again, it's such an honor to meet all of you. Thank you for inviting me, Rikin. And I hope our paths will cross again soon.
Oh, please come back, please come back.
We
want you back, Simon. I think Rikin. So I'm gonna set my intention and create that manifestation right now, because it is within the 4 principles, right? That I'm practicing this very moment. Is to have you come back, Simon, at the end of this book, once we've gone through the whole book, because I think it will give us a different listening, a different understanding, because Ricken's going to take us into the depths and dive into each chapter, which so by having you come back and revisit us, I think, and Avni's like, yes, Avni, yeah, Avni, it will. So I'm speaking on behalf of all the Titans, all our friends. We would be honored to have you back at some point. Say yes.
I would love to.
Yeah, done.
I look forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Simon.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye. You're all amazing.
Thank you so much.
Leaders.
Thank you.
Love you all.
Love you all.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Gerald, for joining us. Thank you, everyone.